Hello, everyone. My name is Rob Higuerita, and I'm a Principal Technical Account Manager at AWS, and I'm based out of Austin, Texas. Welcome to AWS Supports You, where AWS support experts provide tips to optimize performance in the cloud, lower cost, and provide you with best practices and design consideration. Joining me today is Assad and Laura from AWS Support. Can you give us a quick introduction, Assad, and then Laura?
Hey, hi everyone. My name is Asad. I'm a technical account manager here at AWS. I'm based out of Bangalore, India. I have been with AWS for close to 5 years now. And as a time, I work with our global enterprise customers to help them plan and build highly scalable, resilient, and more secure solutions. And I'm very excited to talk to you about introducing AWS Resilience Hub with you.
Well, yeah, and hi everyone. My name is Laura Hyatt. I am the Global Solutions Architect for AWS Resilience Hub. So I've been with AWS now for 3 years, not quite as long as I said, but still quite a long time. Yeah, so really looking forward to telling you about the service. Obviously, as the Solutions Architect for the service, it's my job to help customers like yourselves use it, and so I'm really excited to introduce you to it.
Great, and thank you both for joining us and for giving us the introduction. Assad, thanks for being up super late with us today, and Laura, I know it's later in the day for you as well too. So, appreciate you all being here and helping us introduce the audience a little bit on the AWS Resiliency Hub. We'll be specifically focusing on, of course, how they can leverage it and use it within their environments. But before we get into the details of everything today, a quick note to all of our attendees online. Please feel free to use the chat window on the right hand side of your screen to let us know where you're joining us from today and share questions and thoughts throughout today's episode. We really do look forward to hearing from you and getting some questions, so please don't be shy and use that little chat window over there. I'm also going to be dropping a link to our survey as well into the chat, so if you'd like to let us know how we did today, please click on the link and leave us your feedback there. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to Assad here so you can walk us through what we're going to be talking about today.
Thank you, Rob. So, here is our agenda for today. We are going to talk about what AWS Resilience Hub really is. How exactly do we define application resilience? The key capabilities of AWS Resilience Hub service, our latest launch announcement, some of the use cases of AWS Resilience Hub, and we will also walk you through the steps detailing how the service actually works. We will follow this with a quick demo of the service and then circle back to some of the helpful resources. Also, like Rob mentioned, we will be very happy to answer your questions at any time during the presentation. So if you have any question, please post them on the chat and we will pause from time to time to get those answered for you. So let's go ahead and get started. Here is our CTO of Amazon.com, Vernal Vogels, and he insists that everything fails all the time. And this reminder has been hugely influential to the developers of high availability systems. He goes on to say, and I quote, that if we could just rip the whole architecture apart and redesign it in a reliable, highly scaled, cloud native manner, we would suddenly be able to build all the functionalities that we wanted our customers to have. What he means is that everything fails all the time, but you cannot have your workload keep failing. And so we need to architect around component failures to be sure of resiliency. And this is exactly where AWS Resilience Hub helps us. AWS Resilience Hub is a new service that provides you with a single place to define, validate, and track the resilience of your applications so you can avoid downtime caused by software or infrastructure disruption. Talking a little bit more about this service, I would also like to mention that AWS Resilience Hub not only helps you proactively protect and prepare your applications from disruption, but the Resilience Hub service also offers resiliency assessment and validation that integrate into your software development lifecycle to uncover resiliency weaknesses. Resilience Hub helps you make sure that the recovery time objective RTO and recovery point objective RPO for your applications can be met, and it further helps resolve issues before they are released into production. Even after, let's say, you deploy an AWS application into production, you can still use the Resilience Hub service to continue tracking the resiliency posture of your application. If an outage occurs, Resilience Hub sends a notification to the operator to launch the associated recovery process. In a way, you can think of this as we taking the reliability pillar from the AWS Resilience, AWS well architected framework and automating this for you. So hopefully this has piqued up your interest a little. So let's take a closer look into this service, shall we? But before we discuss any further, it's important that we all understand what exactly application resilience is. When we are architecting any application, we want to make sure that we build resilient applications. But we also know that building resilience is hard. The question is not if a system will fail, but when it will. And when it does, we all need to be prepared for that. So, keeping this in mind, resilience targets are typically measured by two metrics. One is the recovery time objective, or the RTO. This is the time it takes for your application to recover from a failure. And then we also have the recovery point objective, which is the RPO. This is the maximum time window in which the data might be lost after an incident. So, depending on your business needs and application, this can be measured in seconds, minutes, hours, or days. I'm now handing it over to Laura to walk us through the next few slides. But before that, we would quickly like to check if there are any questions.
Hey, Saad, thanks for the introduction so far. No questions from the audience, so audience members, please do make sure to post your questions over here in the right-hand side of our screen in the chat box there. I do have a quick question, though, Saad, for you. Covered a little bit, about what Resilience Hub is, but what are customers kind of saying about Resilience Hub, and how are they being successful using it?
Oh yeah. So the response so far from our customers has been great. We have customers, using it to assess their resilience preparedness. And one key feature, which I'm sure Laura will, share more in detail, is that we are able to generate and track the application's resiliency score. Right, having something like this really makes it very simple for customers to achieve their RTO and RPO targets according to their business use case. And we also have something called as integrating this service into your CI/CD pipeline, so that every time there is a change in your code, or every time there is a new sprint release, you'll be able to get a updated report, and then you can quickly compare their RTOs and RPOs being met or not. So I mean, and considering all these features, and some of which Laura is going to share to us shortly, the customers have been absolutely loving the service so far. So I'll just take a pause over here and maybe let Laura also add few cents to that.
Yeah, just to add to that, so as a solutions architect, I think what I really like about it and what I'm hearing from customers as well is that as a solutions architect, we, design systems to be, fault tolerant and use best practices. But what I'm hearing from customers is that this is a really great tool to validate that what we've actually architected and implemented is as resilient as we think it is, essentially. Like, it's like a check to make sure that what we've done is actually going to meet because meeting RTO and RPO, those metrics, is quite hard to conceptualize without actually putting it into production. It's quite hard to get those down to the second kind of numbers. And so this is obviously a tool to be able to show you whether you're actually going to meet those metrics or not. So that's what I'm kind of hearing from customers, especially from the solutions architect type customer, is there's a great check to validate the work that they've done.
Great, thank you both for that little insights there on what how it's being successful for customers. So I appreciate that. And Laura, I guess I'll turn it over to you here to continue on.
Yeah, so to follow on from what Asad was saying, these are sort of the key capabilities that Resilience Hub can do. So if we can just walk through them, as Asad said, you can define your own RTO and RPO. And so you can design this down to the second. You can do it in seconds, minutes, hours, or days, depending on how critical your application is. And you can also define them at the infrastructure level. So talking, say, like EC2 component, or you can also define at the AZ level and also at the regional, if you don't have to do region, but if you wanted to do, say, if there was a regional outage as well, you can also define at that level as well. So yeah, overall, it's obviously an assessment to uncover the resilience weaknesses, but it is more than that. So it will tell you whether you're going to meet your RTO and RPO with the current architecture. But obviously, the benefit is that if you're not going to meet the RTO and RPO that you've currently set, it's going to tell you how to re-architect to meet your own defined resilience SLAs. So essentially, if you're not going to meet, if you're not prepared, if you've put, say, a regional outage or an AZ outage, and you don't actually have the architecture to be able to recover from those, it's going to tell you how to re-architect to meet those. But as well as the sort of main component architecture, we also make recommendations for operational recommendations as well. So SOPs, standard operating procedures, and also CloudWatch alarms. And so what this is, so if I go to the alarms first, obviously we want to make sure that your architecture will recover and come back up, but obviously a great thing is prevention. It's kind of always what we want to do first. And so if you can install CloudWatch alarms that would sort of alert you, say, if your utilization, very sort of standard one, but if your utilization of an instance, say for CPU, is getting pretty high, we always say like 60-70% is kind of the sort of threshold, we kind of say, put that alarm in so you can kind of get an alert before something actually happens. And so we make the recommendations for all the alarms that could fit in with the components of your architecture for resilience. And then the SOPs, these are things, best practices, like say if you're using a old or sort of older version of an instance, T2 micro, obviously T3 is out now. And so these are things where actually automatically you could scale to the next generation of instance types by installing these SOPs, and that's through SSM. And actually, the good thing about these is that, while, and to make it clear, we're obviously making no changes to your architecture, and these are purely recommendations, and it's up to you to develop them, build them how you want. But you can download the CloudFormation script for the SOPs and alarms, and also the next one, which is about fault injection simulator. So you can actually download we generate the code snippet. So it is in CloudFormation. We are going to be launching the Terraform snippet soon, but you can download those and then add them into your infrastructure as code if you want to. And talking of fault injection simulator, so for anyone who doesn't know, fault injection simulator, or FIS as it's often known, is another AWS service. It's our chaos engineering tool. So if anyone's familiar with chaos engineering, Netflix kind of made it famous with their chaos monkey, and basically this simulates outages. So simulates an EC2 instance going out, or an AZ outage, or a spike in memory, things like that. And so, as well as, again, being, actually being able to recover, you want to obviously test that your architecture is going to handle outages. And so you can do this test, use fault injection simulator. And so again, when you run the assessment, we make recommendations and actually produce the test cases for your architecture. And again, they're in CloudFormation, and you can run them directly through Resilience Hub. You don't need to go outside of the service to run these. And actually, a little fact: we actually produce more test cases than the native fault injection simulator service. So, for example, a lot of customers say, "Oh, Lambda isn't available in FIS." You can actually get Lambda test cases through Resilience Hub. Just a little inside tip there. And then the dashboard view. So when I go into the demo, you'll obviously see the kind of dashboard. If you're familiar, things like Security Hub, or even things like Control Tower, you'll kind of understand this kind of portfolio dashboard view, where you can kind of see, what different applications are doing, the status of different things, maybe some CloudWatch alarms and metrics, and kind of that one shop kind of look. And so we're the kind of the same, is that you can kind of get a snapshot of the resilience of all the different applications in your account. And I'll show you that in the demo. Then the CI/CD integration. So obviously, this is important, as Asad said, to make sure, when obviously you're making changes to your infrastructure, that the assessment updates to reflect any changes you've done, because obviously the idea is that as we make recommendations to re-architect, then you will hopefully re-architect to meet your resilience goals, and then you'll be able to see those changes and get a better score, which I'll mention in a second. And the way this is at the moment is that you can do schedule assessments, and they are on a daily basis. You can turn that on. And so rather than like doing a manual assessment, which you can do at any point, you can do a 24-hour cycle assessment. Then, as I mentioned, the score. So this is a really interesting thing. This is a metric, and if anyone's interested in how we've calculated the metric and the weighting, we can post that in the chat, the little link in the documentation, if anyone's kind of into maths. But essentially, this is a score that you get out of 100, so like 100%. So if your whole architecture and all the different components and all the different services that make up your architecture, if that is going to meet your your own defined RTO and RPO, then you'll get a score of 100%. And obviously, the less you're going to meet your RTO and RPO, and the more components that are kind of going to fail, then the lower the score you get. And the idea is that as you re-architect and rerun the assessment, hopefully you'll see your score going up. And you can use this for many different things. I have customers using it more for like a business justification reason. Often it's used for sort of developer time. We spent X amount of developer hours and we've gone up 20 points, things like that. And then finally, like with all AWS services, we do tie in with Audit Trail for compliance, so you can view, API calls, who's done what, etc. in Resilience Hub. So that's the key capabilities. So if we go on to the next, so a few, I say launch announcements. This was back in May, but a few things that if you've used the service before, you might not have picked up on. There are 3 more launches throughout the year, so we are making new improvements all the time to the service and adding new features. But the top there, so this is actually all of the services that we currently support for Resilience Hub. So just, FYI, not all AWS services are currently supported by Resilience Hub. We're a small team, we're working on it as quickly as possible. But this is obviously the main ones: EC2, auto scaling groups, RDS, all flavors of RDS, Aurora, as you can see there, API Gateway, etc. They're all covered by it. We do have other services as well, support for those coming out throughout the year, and then of course more in 2023 as well. But they're all the services that we currently support. And then support for Terraform. So when we launched with CloudFormation support. And what I mean by that is that you need to choose your infrastructure, your applications that you want to run an assessment against. And so we started off with you either choose, if you have sort of infrastructure as code, it was CloudFormation. So you choose the stacks that you have launched in your account. Or if you're more like ClickOps, then you could choose resource groups. However, Terraform is obviously very, very popular. I used to be a Terraform developer myself. So we now support Terraform as well. So you can choose Terraform state files that are in S3 buckets to also run assessments against. And then, as I mentioned, the scheduled resilience assessments. So we did launch that feature back in May. So you can now run them on a 24-hour basis. All right, next, please. All right, yeah. So just sort of few use cases. If you're kind of wondering, why you might want to use this. Obviously, resilience is critical for anybody, and so I really think like it kind of speaks for itself. However, just to kind of quantify that, you obviously want to protect, especially your mission critical applications. I see a lot of customers in sort of the regulated space, financial, and then also retail as well, because in regulated space, obviously you've got to be within the compliance and regulatory rules, but also retail. If you think about it, if your sort of online shopping website goes down even for a few minutes, that can cost you potentially, depends how big you are, but millions of dollars. And so you want to be prepared if there is an outage to come back up as quickly as possible. And then of course reduce costs. So I think this is an interesting one that I hear and see a lot, as a solutions architect, is that people who are, sort of on it when it comes to resilience often might over architect to make sure they're going to be ready, in the case of an outage. And that's obviously going to cost you, more money. Essentially, it's pay as you go. And so actually this will tell you exactly what you need to architect and what components you need to add in to meet your resilience goals. So overall, you're only going to pay, for exactly kind of what you need. You're not overpaying. And also it comes as well with an estimated cost for any of the changes that we're recommending as well. And then finally, as I mentioned, contractual and regulatory requirements. So there are, if you're sort of in a either financial kind of industry or maybe public sector, often there are sort of compliance rules around resilience and the amount of time and amount of data you can also lose. If you think about sort of in public sector and things like that, you don't want to, there's sort of rules around, how much, data that's being lost. And so using Resilience Hub can help you meet those regulatory rules as well. Right, I'm going to hand back over to Asad now to tell us how it works.
Thank you, Laura. So here's a quick walkthrough of the steps that you will be taking in Resilience Hub. The first step is to import your infrastructure as code. You can describe your applications using AWS CloudFormation with cross-region and cross-account stacks, or use AWS Terraform state files. Applications can also be described using the resource groups, or you can choose from the applications that are already defined in the AWS Service Catalog app registry. Whichever way you choose, you're going to add this application to the AWS Resilience Hub as step one. Step two is to create a resiliency policy or to define the targets you have for this particular application. As you know, some applications will have the need to have a very low RTO, and for some, you may be able to also have much larger RTOs, like maybe a quarterly reporting application. So, whatever the RTO is, here is where you define those. To quickly recap, RTO is the time it takes for your application to recover from a failure, and RPO is the maximum window of time in which the data might be lost after an incident. So AWS Resilience Hub resiliency policy that you create in this step contains the information and objectives that are used to assess whether your application can overcome from a disruption type, such as a software or a hardware disruption. When you create a resiliency policy, you define the RTO and RPO for the disruption types. These objectives are used to determine whether the application meets the resiliency policy or not. In step three, after you have described your application and also attached the resiliency policy to it, we run a resiliency assessment. We query your resources, we understand your configurations, and we provide an assessment as to whether we think you can meet your own targets or not. The assessment evaluates your application configuration against the resiliency policy that is attached to the application and generates a report. The report shows how your application measures against the objectives in your resiliency policy. So, as an example, let's say you have a single AZ or a single availability zone Amazon RDS database instance, and you do have a backup for it, but you're not on multi AZ. If you want to understand your resiliency for an AZ disruption, we are going to tell you that you're probably not going to meet your objective if you have a low RTO. We will also tell you that you can recover because you have a backup, but it won't necessarily be as quick as you want it to be. And then we'll also make configuration recommendations, perhaps to go to a multi-AZ RDS in this example. We'll also make operational recommendations, such as using CloudWatch alarms, SOPs that are standard operating procedures to test recovery. For this particular example, SOP would be to restore from a backup. This will give you the estimated time for the restore in case of an AZ disruption. Now that you have the recommendations after running the assessment, step 4 is where you implement some or all of the recommendations we made. As we discussed earlier, recommendations could include configurations of components, alarms, tests, and recovery SOPs. Here, you can run another assessment and compare the results with the previous report to see how much the resiliency has improved. You can reiterate this process until you have achieved the goals for your RTO and RPO. Next, we will use the fault injection simulator to actually run fault injection experiments to simulate outages on your AWS resources. Examples of outages could include network unavailable errors, failovers, stop processes on EC2 and autoscaling groups, boot recovery in case of Amazon RDS, and problems with your availability zones. When this experiment concludes, you can determine whether an application can recover from the outage type defined in the RTO in the resiliency policy. Now, the best part is once you have integrated this into your CI CD pipeline, you will be able to ensure that every time there is a new release, or let's say at the end of the sprint, you will be able to see an assessment of your resilience and also do a test to validate the same. Lastly, the service dashboard will allow you to see the resilience posture, including the resilience score mentioned earlier. This score reflects how closely the application follows our recommendations for meeting the application resiliencies, policy, alarms, SOPs, and tests. The top resiliency score is 100%. To achieve a top score, all recommended tests must complete in a predefined time period, initiate all the correct alarms, and initiate all the SOPs attached to them. For example, if the AWS Resilience Hub recommends one test and one alarm and one SOP, then the test runs and fires the alarm and initiates the associate SOP. If this performs successfully and the application meets the resiliency policy, it would receive a resiliency score of 100%. Development teams, especially working on close timelines, do know that over time, trade offs are made between new functionality and resilience, of course, without even realizing this. So now that you know Resilience Hub will be able to help you catch those and prevent the issue before it goes into production and before it can even cause an outage, this should really come in handy for you. And now I would like to hand it back to Laura for a demo and would also like to see if there are any quick questions.
Hey, Assad, thanks. And Laura, thank you as well for everything. I do have a couple questions that came in as you guys were going through the content. We have a question from Denny1111. Can we use Resiliency Hub with AWS CDK?
Yeah, so you can. It's slightly limited in the sense of you can build your application and you can define a resilience policy with CDK, but you can't then do the whole run of the assessment and everything like that. So it is limited. You can start to do it, but you'll still need to run the assessment. You can do it through the CLI, but you can't run the assessment through the CDK. And that's the same also with CloudFormation as well. Again, you can build out the application and the policy, but you'll still need to either use the console or the CLI to actually run the assessment.
Great, thanks, Laura. And I'll post a link to the CDK module for Resilience Hub in the chat here as well. And we had another question that came in, I think that's really important on what you were covering, Laura, as well, on the RTO, RPO items, and making sure that customers really plan for that, right, and can get that scale and such. But I have a question from JibJab06 that was wondering if AWS can make suggestions onto what their RPO or RTO should be.
Yeah, so actually, when I go into the demo, I'll show you. But a little bit like I say, like I am, you can either completely, write your own down to the second, or like with I am, there's the sort of Amazon sort of suggested templated policies. So yes, so we have suggested templated policies, and we've broken them down into different categories. Like critical application, non-production, kind of different tiers as we call them. So yes, and we make suggestions for the RTO and RPO of those. And of course, you could either click those and just use that, or you could maybe take those suggestions and tweak them a little bit and write your own. And of course, as well, if you choose one of the templated ones, if you don't know where to begin, and then later on you can redefine them, of course, you can just change the policy with a click. Like it's not a one-way door, as we say.
Yeah, that's great that we at least have some templates that are available in case you're just getting started and figuring out what your disaster recovery strategy is. You can start from somewhere at least with the guide. So great. All right, well, I'll turn it back over to you to continue on through your demo here, Laura. Thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Right. So hopefully this should start. Okay, yes. So Resilience Hub, you will find it in the console like any other service. Obviously, I've got it on recently visited, but you basically go to the search bar like you would for any service and just search for it. So yep, it's available in all regions except China and GovCloud, and also the only sort of, I guess, standard region is Jakarta that's not available, and that's due to some compliance kind of reasons. But this is basically the dashboard that I mentioned earlier, so that kind of dashboard view. So as you can kind of see on the left-hand side, this is where you'd have your applications which are in policy. Obviously, you want that number to be nice and high. This is my demo account, so obviously it's not, because I'm showing you kind of the recommendations of when you're not in policy. But this is a number that you want to be nice and large. And then if I go over then to the next one, we have basically where you're breaching the policy. So there's a number of applications that you've loaded in that is not meeting your SLA, so not meeting the RTO and RPO that you've set. And then, of course, not assessed. So you don't have to run the assessment straight away. You can basically as an application and come back to it at a later stage if you want to. You don't have to do it straight away. So this would be the number there. And then this is any changes that are detected. So we talked about earlier sort of drift detection. So this is where basically if there's been any changes, say, to a cloud formation and they've not been reassessed, and that would be there. Then if we're looking at this score over time, so essentially what this is that resilience score that we mentioned, that score out of 100. So this is just basically a snapshot view. It shows you the 4 latest applications that you've worked on. As you can see, my score is flat because again, it's a demo account, so I'm actually not making any changes. But the idea is that as you make changes, this line would go up. Obviously, the idea is you get a better score as you re-architect, and so you'll be able to track that over time. And so it just kind of shows you can choose 4 applications down at that top bit there. Then if we move down, again, as this is just a demo account, I haven't installed any alarms or experiments. Experiments are the FIS fault injection simulator. Sometimes they're called experiments or tests. You'll hear different words around AWS. But essentially, if you've got any running, then they would be shown there as kind of snapshot view. So let's go to add an application, show you how to do it. So essentially, this is all the choices you have to basically add an application to be assessed. We have CloudFormation. So obviously, any stacks that you've got currently running in your account, you can choose those. We have, as I mentioned, Terraform. So that's state files that are in an S3 bucket. If you are more into ClickOps, as it's called, or building in the console, I only learned the word ClickOps the other day, to be honest. You can choose resource groups, and this is a great one as well. A lot of people ask me, oh, can you do it by tags? Technically, you can't just choose a tag, but obviously resource groups can work on tagging. So you create a resource group based on your tags. You've got existing application. So if you want to, for whatever reason, wanted to duplicate what you already had in Resilience Hub, you can. And then also the app registry as well. Now, the number of stacks that you can use, actually, it's sort of this is slightly changing this week, so a little heads up. So it says there, if you can read that, a maximum of 5 CloudFormation stacks, and it's the same as well for Terraform. It'll say 5 state files. Actually, by the end of this week, that will be changing to 20, because we realized that often people architect when they're doing infrastructure as code, they architect by breaking out their infrastructure, maybe a stack for compute, a stack for networking, a stack for storage. I certainly did that. And so, you might want more than 5. So by the end of the week, you'll be able to actually choose up to 20. Now, as you can see, what I'm doing is that I am just going to all the stacks that I have in my account already. And basically, you can choose, it says up to 5 at the moment, but you can choose up to 20 by the end of the week. Now, you can do also stacks that are outside of the region and also outside of your account as well. So you can do cross account as well. And so you can obviously see that I'm in North Virginia, but if you want to use a stack that's, and the same with, Terraform and resource groups, you can put the AR in down there as well. So basically then you go and choose a stack that you want to. I'm just choosing a very basic LAMP stack, nothing fancy, but then basically you give it a name. So pretty much the same standard like you would for kind of other resource description if you want. This is where then if you want to do a scheduled assessment, so that's where it runs on a daily basis, on a 24-hour basis. If you don't click that, then you have to do a manual assessment, and you can do manual assessments as well as the daily one as well. And obviously add in any tags, standard practice. So this is where it's going to find then the resources in your, I'm going to say CloudFormation stack. Obviously you can use, as I mentioned, Terraform, resource groups, etc. But I'm using CloudFormation. So this is all the resources that it has found. So it's a basic LAMP stack. So, we've kind of got a MySQL database. We've got an EC2 instance for your web server, and there is a load balancer as well. So obviously it'll show you what the resources are, what stack they've come from, because again, you can use multiple stacks. Now, where it says here about included, not supported. As I mentioned earlier, we don't currently support all sort of AWS services. So it will be able to find all the different AWS services, but not everything's supported. So you can kind of see, MySQL RDS and EC2 are supported, but currently application load balancers or just load balancers in general are not supported, but they are coming out in about a month's time. I can't say the exact date because you know how these sort of things go, but in about a month's time, we will be launching support for load balancers, and that'll be all the load balancers. But so it'll say at the moment, so the way that this works is that when you run the assessment, it basically will do the assessment on the included or the supported resources, and it won't sort of assess the resiliency of that not supported one. So that's the way that works. Now, you can also manually exclude resources as well if you wanted to. So, for whatever reason, if you've not fully started, finishing something, you can also manually exclude them if you wanted to do that as well. So basically then if we go to next, and this is where you set then your policy. So I've got one there already that I've already created in the past, but let's go to create a new one. So this is when again someone asked, creating a policy or using a suggested policy or a templated policy. So if we go to that sort of templated policy, these are our suggested policies with RTO and RPOs based on sort of different criticality, is that word, of applications. You can see there's sort of a non-critical application, and so we've kind of got a 2-day sort of RTO. But if you've got foundational core sort of IT, then you're kind of looking at sort of 30 seconds for infrastructure and maybe 10 minutes if there's a regional outage. And there's lots of sort of different ones there that you could do, and you could select one of those to add or create a policy. Now it's not like we don't ask you to write any JSON. It's basically drop down boxes. So you would choose basically seconds, minutes, hours, days, and at the different levels. So whether you've got the application level is basically sort of bad code, sort of human error, things like that if you were to do something. As it kind of says there, APIs that failed, etc. The infrastructure is, say, at the component level. So, if an EC2 instance was to, to terminate, reboot, etc., to fail. Availability zone, AZ outage, and then the optional, if a region was to go out. Obviously, not everybody wants to sort of architect for regional failure, but you can do that. So I'm just going to select one pre-made that I've already done. I've set a very optimistic RTO and RPO there of 5 seconds, but I just want to show you kind of what it looks like. Obviously, this is all kind of, you just want to review, make sure you're happy with all the kind of things that, you've set, the names, you're happy with your RTO and RPO. So this is what I've done. So basically you go to publish. Now, as I said before, you don't have to run the assessment straight away. So you do need to click run assessment because you might want to do it. You also want to give it a better name. It does come with sort of a random ID. If you're used to CloudFormation, you'll kind of know that it generates this random ID. So I'd give the assessment a better name. And basically then you press assess, and as you can see there, it's generating that report. It's very, very quick because literally it's just an assessment. It's running through that CloudFormation. We're not making any changes, so it's super, super fast. Obviously, the more infrastructure you've got, the slower it be. But I had a customer that had 50 different components, and it took like not even a minute. So it's very, very fast. So this is basically where you can see the assessment kind of at a high level. So obviously it's ran, it was successful, but we are not in policy. So what that means is that 5 seconds that I set, that very optimistic 5 seconds, we're not going to meet those SLAs based on the architecture that I've currently got. So then when you go into the assessment, you can break it down. So you can see the RTO and RPO at a high level. So this is overall. So all the different components that make your architecture. So as you can see, and you can also see like application sort of components like human error, that's things, we would actually meet, I'd set a targeted 1 hour and we would actually meet, sort of recover from that. But looking at the other ones, I'd set sort of optimistically, 5 seconds, 30 seconds, and we're not currently. It's going to estimate it. The architecture I've got, it's going to take around 30 minutes to recover. And because I actually put in for regional outage, but I've got in my architecture, there is nothing to, fail over to another region. So it's unrecoverable. So that's why that says. So you can kind of see they're the targeted ones for each of those, and they're the estimated times that based on the architecture you've got. So then if we then go further down, oh yes, I'm just explaining the unrecoverable part. So obviously regional you don't have to do, but if you did want to. So then this is where then we break it down by component. So obviously there may be certain components that are meeting your RTO and RPO and others not. And so you want to see basically the say single point of failure, but the failure points for the different components. When I say components, I mean the different services and so each component you might have like 5 EC2 instances, and so you've got 5 components there of EC2. So you can kind of see then on a broken down level how long each component is going to take to recover. You can see here AZ, etc. So then this is where the sort of the fun happens, the recommendations. So you can kind of see here, these are the recommendations that we're making. So obviously, the more architecture you've got, the more complicated, the sort of richer the data you'll get. But as you can kind of see here, it's saying you want to add some auto-scaling groups in, especially if you're wanting to do multi-region and multiple availability zones in those regions. At the moment, my architecture, I didn't have any of that. So it's telling you need to add in that. And if you can see the changes, it's saying you need to add in, auto-scaling groups in different regions, ASG, make it sort of minimum size larger than 1, etc. And also, as you can kind of see, it tells you the rough price as well of those changes as well. So I mentioned about saving money. Now, obviously, depending on how large your architecture, again, this was just a lamp stack, 3 different components. So the sort of the changes is not a huge amount of architectural change I'd need to make. Obviously, the more complex, the more rich the information and sort of sort of different architectural options, recommendations. We've obviously got those optimized for AZ, optimized for cost, and also minimal changes. Obviously, again, the larger the architecture, there's more options to do different architectural patterns, and so those would change. Now, if we go to operational recommendations, this is what we're talking about, those standard operating procedures or SOPs, and also those alarms and the fault injection simulator templates. So as you can see, these alarms, obviously, if you're familiar with AWS, you'll probably recognize some of these alarms, report when CPU utilization is high, when, memory is high, when database, storage is low. And these are all alarms to basically alert you for when things, sort of slightly going wrong. And as I mentioned, you can also download the CloudFormation template, the code snippet of these. So we do generate them. So if you want to add them straight into your architecture, we are later on in the year also support for Terraform code snippets as well to generate for those as well. And then the SOPs or standard operating procedures. So as I mentioned, these are kind of like best practices or things. So, scale up, they use a larger instance, things like that. And these are using SSM. And again, you can create the CloudFormation. And then finally, the fault injection simulator. So these are your tests, so chaos engineering. And so you do create the test cases. And again, in CloudFormation, but as you can kind of see there, simulate an outage for a whole AZ. So you can simulate things like that. And you test the app performance under load, and that's, CPU or memory, things like that. What happens if an RDS instance reboots? And again, create the CloudFormation template and use that as you like. And then, so if you go and went to the templates, this is where if you generated any of those templates, you could see those. And overall, that is how Resilience Hub works. You can see it's a very, simple solution, but a very powerful one, and it gives you a lot of benefit and kind of validates that the architecture that you've done is correct, and if not, how to fix it. So maybe now we should take for a quick question break if there's any.
Hey, thanks for going through that demo. No questions from the audience right now, so I appreciate that you were able to cover things so well that no one had any questions. Yeah. Overall, no, I really appreciate the demo of it so far. Just to be able to see kind of some of those recommendation remediation options and different things that you kind of have built in there for when you're deploying architecture to give you that kind of peace of mind. So thanks for that. And if anyone does have any last minute questions, please feel free to post them into the chat now.
Yeah, please do.
All right. I'll let you go over this last slide here on some different resources.
Yep. Thanks, Rob. So thank you so much, Laura, for the demo. And before we wrap, actually, I would like to quickly mention that achieving resiliency is a continuous improvement process. It's not a one-time activity. Also, you have to be prepared for the worst. And how you do that is by testing your resiliency plan. And hopefully, now that you are more aware of the AWS Resilience Hub service, this should make it a lot more easier for you. You can learn a lot more about the service by looking at the links shared here. These links will be available on the chat live today, or if you're watching it, let's say later on YouTube, you can find these in the video description as well. And with that, we are at the end of our episode. Thank you very much for your time. We hope that this discussion was a helpful one.
Great. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Assad, so much. And thank you, audience, for joining us today for today's episode, where we took a look at AWS Resilience Hub and how easy it is to get started with it. If there are any questions that we did miss in the chat, please feel free to post your questions on repost.aws, where one of our experts can provide you with an answer to your question, or it could even become a topic of one of our future shows. So if you have feedback, please make sure to check on that chat box again for that link that I will post again here shortly to take our survey, or you can email us at AWS Supports You at Amazon.com, because we do really want to hear from you, and also let us know what else you'd like to see on the show. So be sure to take some time to join us next Monday, July 25th, where we'll be diving deep into Amazon recognition. And thank you, Laura and Assad, again, and thank you everyone else for joining us at AWS Supports You, and happy cloud computing.
Happy cloud computing, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.